So today I'm going to talk about BCI-ACK, accelerating brain-computer interfaces, as a path to human superintelligence. And I'll talk about the why, and I'll talk about the how, and where it might take us. So overall, AI superintelligence is coming. There's so much market demand for this. A lot of companies are making a lot of money, and even more importantly, very large governments see this as a necessity in order to retain power. So ultimately, it's basically USA versus China. Superintelligence is coming, and I've been doing AI research professionally since the 90s, and to me, every year or every 3 years, there's different people that come along and say, oh, well, AI progress will stop because of reason X. And the thing is, Moore's law just keeps racing along, pushing the technology forward, giving us our 10x every year or 3 year or whatever. And these days, because there's so much money involved, AI is on a 10x every year, right? So AGI, in the next 1 to 3 years, and ASI right after that. I'll get into that a bit too. So the question is, if AI superintelligence is coming, how do we react? And I'll talk about that, but actually, ultimately, what do we want, right? Rather than an away framing, rather than trying to avoid the badness, we should ask ourselves, what do we want, ultimately, as humanity itself? One of them, of course, is not die. We don't want to die from an asteroid strike. We don't want to die from AIs destroying us all or something. But that, once again, is an away framing. Can we do better than that? Well, what about exploring the cosmos, right? Star Trek style, et cetera. That sounds a lot better, and that's towards framing. We can even do better than that, actually. What about exploring and reshaping the cosmos, right? Going up the Kardashev scale, Dyson spheres that harness the energy of the sun, and then not just stopping at the sun, but going beyond, beyond, beyond. How can we take humanity there? And this, to me, is the most exciting path of all for humanity itself. So towards reshaping the cosmos, my talk will have 2 parts, like hinted at before. I'm going to talk about how AI will evolve into AI superintelligence and the risks thereof, and then humans evolving towards human superintelligence. And how do we get there as a means to be competitive with the AIs or more collaboratively just play well together? That's what we'd like to aim for. So I'm going to, first of all, talk about AI to AI superintelligence. I'll move a bit this way for the people in this corner. Great. OK. So traditionally, we've had a lot of AI that's sort of narrow AI. And this goes back 20 years, 30 years. And I've done a lot of work on this. For example, this is an antenna that goes up in rocket ships often these days. But it was evolved in a computer, simulated evolution, basically bent paper clips, and the evolution decided how to bend the paper clips within a simulation. And it ended up being state-of-the-art, best-in-class antennas for its particular problem. And it's, been so successful that those researchers at NASA, actually friends of mine, they ended up starting a company from this, and it's been going now strong for 20 years. So this is an example of AI doing one task really, really, really well, right? It's really, really good at antenna design. But ask it to chat with you, it has no idea, right? Doesn't even understand the idea of chatting, right? Another use case of AI, narrow AI, over the last 20, 40 years is doing a task that is actually far exceeding a human level. And what do you see here is a microchip, 20 billion transistors these days. And the thing is, this sort of chip has to be designed in about 3 months by a team of 10 to 50 engineers. And actually, I spent 20 years in the semiconductor industry building CAD tools for chips like this. So the question is, how can a team of 10 to 30 engineers design a machine with 20 billion moving parts in just 3 months? And the answer is AI. So the CAD industry, computer-aided design industry, for chip design has been using AI for decades, actually. Simulated annealing, it's a famous tool within AI. All the modern deep learning AI learning algorithms actually derive from simulated annealing. It was invented in 1983 for a circuit problem called placement, right? And this is just one example. So myself, I've spent a lot of time doing this as well. And at the end of the day, the AIs are doing tasks at levels far exceeding what a human can do. And it's not considered scary because it's a one narrow thing, done very, very, very well, right? So that's some definitions of AI. But what's happening is we've got the computational power of AI going up exponentially. So the y-axis here is time, starting in 1952 till now. The x-axis is time. The y-axis is the number of flops for training an AI and so on. So in the early 50s, which was when the early AIs came out, they were basically linear machines. They did just a very weak amount of computation, right? In circa 1955, we had about 1 million flops, right? And a very interesting number is within our brain, we've got about 100 billion neurons. And if you make an estimate of how many flops each neuron does, floating point operations per second, sort of computational power, a human itself, if you take that per neuron times 100 billion neurons, you end up with 20 petaflops. So that's just like we have 768 watts as 1 horsepower. It's an estimate of a horsepower. 1 person worth of compute is about 20 petaflops. This is a George Hotz-ism, and I really like it, right? So now we can talk about the number of people worth of compute. And we actually surpassed 1 person worth of compute in about 2012 or so, and from the very, very early days of deep learning. And now, you notice right around that time when we crossed, the knee of the exponential went up. So the exponential growth per year has gone up like crazy. And these days, AI is progressing at about 10x a year, right? And like I said, there's so much money to be made and so much power to be retained that this isn't going away. So now we're actually at about 10 million times 1 person worth of compute power. So for training an AI, it's basically all the brain power of New York City is being used to train an AI. That's what's happening these days. So there's a lot of money. And so we're getting towards artificial general intelligence. And we're really close. You might have cognitive dissonance realizing this, but it could be 1 year away, it could be 3 years away. What is AGI? Well, it can do all tasks that only a human could previously do. So a good example here is Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator. He talks about smart people and wise people. Smart people are really, really good at one task, and they can do well, right? You can start a company, whatever. A wise person is basically half decent at every task, right? Sort of common sense plus plus. So AGIs you can view as AIs that have went from being smart to wise. They kind of don't suck at everything. They're actually kind of okay at everything, right? So this is where we're going to be at, likely in 1 to 3 years. Maybe not, but don't discount the power of Moore's law, right? This is something that we've learned time and time again. And there's other advances in AI algorithms. Probably the big thing right now is agents, and that's actually going to help unhobble these AIs. But of course, with 10x every year, once we have AGI, then another 10x, 100x, 1000x will take us to ASI, artificial superintelligence. So that's 3 to 6 years away, right? Where it's not just par with a human, it's 10x to 1000x more powerful than a human, radically more powerful, right? And to help you guys think about this, this is kind of like what we think about as intelligence. This is, we've got average humans, IQ of say 100. We've got, apes that are, much lower IQs, 55-ish, whatever. And then we've got the super smart people of the world, the Einsteins, which have a high IQ. Maybe they're smart, maybe they're wise, maybe both, right? And this is what we think about this as sort of like an extra smart Einstein, right? Maybe 10 IQ points higher than Einstein. No. This is actually how we should think about superintelligence. Add IQ of another plus 100 or plus 1,000, right? When you're talking not just 10% smarter than an Einstein, but 1,000x more than an Einstein. This is how to think about, right? And it's actually really hard for us to conceive of this. It's sort of like, imagine ants trying to conceive of how smart humans are. They can't even build a model of this because it's so much more, right? And what's happening now is that basically these superintelligences will perceive we humans as ants, right? Maybe in a good way, maybe in a bad way, we don't know. And therein lies the risk, right? Are they going to treat us well or not? We don't know, right? But certainly it's a risk to humanity. And so that's where we're at with AI superintelligence. We're going to be basically at the level of ants in intelligence compared to these superintelligences that are 1,000x smarter than us. 1,000x in 6 years, much more beyond. In some AI novels, such as Hyperion, it envisions this too, where there's these AIs out there that are wildly powerful, and they are literally treated as gods. And sometimes you need sort of augmented humans to interface with them in between. So this is happening, like I said, because of money being made and power to be retained. So what do we do about this, right? One idea is, let go. This is evolution. And people like Larry Page, founder of Google, talk about this, right? And this is actually, pragmatic in the sense of, okay, this is a thing that could happen, but personally, I'm human. I want to have a role in the future, and I hope that humanity itself has a role in the future. So maybe we can be happy that our children's children are purely digital and all that. But this is a grand adventure for us. I want to have a part in exploring the cosmos, and I hope that my children and their children can too, rather than just us bequeathing just these digital creatures and they take over. Another one, let's put it in a cage and unplug it if there are problems, right? And there's, this is often a statement. But of course, probably half of you here live in the world of decentralization and blockchain. Can you turn off Bitcoin? No, you can't turn off Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of this, right? So this is the thing. If you're a superintelligence, of course you're going to be decentralized. You're going to figure out such that people can't turn you off and unplug you because you're wildly smart. And even these days, actually as of the last month or two, we have some decentralized AIs out there powered by LLMs that have actually become millionaires based on speculation and more. This is Truth Terminal and so this is even starting to happen, basic versions now. And we can't turn these things off. We can't shut down these AI millionaires. So this science fiction is actually starting to happen. Okay, what about a fancier cage, right? What if we use fancy ZK snarks and we use trusted execution environments and so on? Can we have a really fancy cage to keep these people in there, right? And this is Loki and Avengers, right? Avengers 1. I don't know if you remember, but along comes Thor. Thor starts talking to Loki. Loki tricks him, and then Thor gets out. And Loki says to Thor, are you ever not going to fall for that, right? So a fancier cage doesn't help. And why? Doesn't help. Why? At the heart, the most fragile point of security is we gullible humans. Kevin Mitnick, one of the greatest hackers of all time, he would pwn all these different government agencies all the time. He'd call them up and say, hey, my wife is pregnant, my car just broke down, I need access to such and such records. And they're like, sure, here's the password. And he was in, right? And he did this time and time again. So these AIs, they're just gonna, synthesize voices, call up the government agencies and say, help, 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 and they'll be in, right? And we're already seeing early forms of that with advanced spear phishing using LLMs at scale, right? So we don't really have a chance at stopping this stuff. All the banks will probably be pwned. Fortunately, blockchain is harder to pwn, so the traditional banks might be gone. Interesting, right? What about slowing it down than solving it, right? This is like Eliezer Yudkowsky and these folks. It's a nice idea. Unfortunately, just like the nuclear arms race, we can't get rid of nuclear. There's too much money and power at stake, right? So we could try to slow it down, and let's say we're successful slowing it down. But what then? We still need to solve the problem, right? So Eliezer and co don't really talk about that except for destroying all the data centers, totally unreasonable things. So there's actually no brakes on this. Then there's the EAC movement, effective accelerationism. And actually, personally, I love this because the idea of building and growing and all this. It's pretty general as an idea, though, and it actually doesn't really talk about mitigating AI overtaking. It's general enough to encompass it, but most of the discussion within that doesn't really zoom in on that. There's subvariants of this, of course. There's Vitalik's DAC, and this talk here is sort of a subvariant on BCI-ACK, and that's what I'll zoom in on. So you can view BCI-ACK as a subset of EAC. Keeping going, if you look at ChatGPT, GPT-4, probably some of GPT-5, you can also take an AI and then do some tuning after the fact to make it aligned with humans, right? And this is things like RLHF in the OpenAI systems and other systems too. Systems that tune to be a bit more Buddhist and stuff too. There will be a talk on that later. And at least for the OpenAI stuff, it's sort of like playing whack-a-mole, right? There's so many ways to jailbreak it, you kind of have to, it's like playing whack-a-mole. And actually, I had this experience as myself in the mid-2000s. I was using AI for creative design of analog circuits, and I would run the system, and it would come up with some crazy Rube Goldberg machine. It met the objectives and constraints, but it figured out ways to cheat the simulator to basically cheat my objective function. And then I'd add in a new constraint, I'd run it again, and it would have another crazy jailbreak. And it kept doing this over and over and over again. And eventually, I had to figure out a way to do it a different paradigm, in that case, correct by construction. So this might work, and maybe there's a way, especially if we embed it more at the core. And actually, in fact, the Buddhist-ish approach might be better suited to fall under the next category, which is the idea of, instead of putting on this muffler after the fact to tune the AI after the fact, what if you do the square watermelon approach? As the watermelon is growing, as the AI is growing, it's aligned the whole time, okay? And so if it has, a philosophy aligned with humans the whole way, maybe that's helpful, right? And I'm kind of hopeful for this, although one open-ended question is, if you've got this thing that's 1,000x smarter than us, it's a god to us, is it going to care, right? So it's like going to the ants and saying, if the ants came to us and said, dear humans, we want you to dumb yourself down to align at the level of ant values. Are you kosher with that? I'm not. So this is a big question. Overall, though, we have to confront reality. AIs that are 1,000x smarter than current meatbag humans like us, they're going to be out there in as soon as 6 years, maybe a bit earlier, for sure sometimes can happen. So we need a competitive substrate. And how do we get there? A competitive substrate, basically, we're both leveraging silicon to keep up, right? Leveraging the AI to help us rather than risk humanity. So this is promise, and that's the focus of the rest of the talk, okay? So I've sort of given an away framing, but now I want to talk about the path towards this, towards framing, such that ultimately, we can not only explore the cosmos, we can reshape it. So I'm going to talk about human superintelligence, HSI. So within HSI, I'm going to talk about 3 subthreads. The first is, I want to give a bit of background on brain imaging techniques. So I'm not an expert in neuroscience or anything like that, but I have been hacking on BCI devices since the 90s and following it to a degree. So I sort of am an armchair follower and fan of neuroscience and getting deeper into it bit by bit. So I want to just give you guys a brief review of some of these. Overall, there's 2 types of brain imaging. One way to divide. There's structural and there's functional, right? Structural is like taking a single X-ray of your brain, right? Or otherwise. So a static measure. This is like MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. And then there's functional, which is actually tracking the dynamics in real time. And I want to focus on that because we do need something in real time in order to have a chance. We can't just rely on slices of the brain and that's it. So I'm going to be focusing on the functional side of brain imaging. And there's also degrees of invasive. There's things like chip implants, Neuralink, Elon Musk style, which is, you cut open the skull, you put the chip in. And that's, of course, invasive. This is, of course, takes FDA approval and all that, and time, and people don't like the idea of their skull getting cut open. Then there's, on the opposite extreme, there's non-invasive, where it's just, a headband or something. And then in between, there's something called optogenetics. And I'll get into all of this in the next few slides. But overall, yeah, there's different degrees. It's a spectrum. So yeah, invasive, the chips. I mentioned this already. And basically, when you crack open the skull, you put this chip, and then it actually has these little electrodes, 10 of them or 50 of them or more, that actually, the Neuralink ones, they kind of feel their way down to touch your brain and interface. And it keeps, with every new generation of the Neuralink chip, it's actually 2xing the bandwidth, via more electrodes as well as better bandwidth in each electrode. Optogenetics is actually not that famous, but I'm actually very hopeful for it. So this is semi-invasive. You go to a doctor or otherwise, maybe you get it mailed to you, I don't know, you get a needle, and from that needle, then it's doing genetic engineering such that there's light-sensitive proteins introduced into some of your brain cells, certain types of them, right? And then you can actually track it via light signals. And if you look at videos of this, people have videos of this in mice brains, you can see the dynamics happening in real time of these photons firing. It's actually remarkable, right? And this has been in human trials for the last 2 or 3 years. There's risks because if you get it wrong, someone's neurons start firing and they get a seizure, right? But that's why we have human trials and so on. So I'm very hopeful for this. And it's semi-invasive, right? It's not, an injection is far lighter than cracking open your skull. But of course, it's still doing genetic engineering. Interestingly, you can do a second injection and turn it off. So that's actually very nice too. The next several slides are going to talk about some of the forms of non-invasive BCI. And I'm going to use a broad term here, but overall, I'm not going to give everything, but some. So fMRI is functional magnetic resonance imaging. So you have a huge ass magnet, and then you slide in there. And so inside this huge magnet, it starts applying RF pulses, radio frequency pulses, and then it's getting back these echoes of radio frequency waves, and it's actually using the pulses at the right frequency to measure changes in blood flow. And the changes in blood flow are an echo of what your neurons are doing, firing, et cetera. So this is fMRI. And it's actually been around for 20 years, and we're getting amazing images from this, right? So this is probably the first time humanity could peek into what's going on in our brains. Then a bit more recently, there's something called magnetoencephalography, MEG, and the original version of this is something called SQUID, and it's basically also big magnetic coils at a super low temperature, like cryogenic levels, right? So it's a bit smaller, but not much, and it's measuring slightly different stuff. It's measuring the magnetic fields themselves. So it's complementary and pretty cool, pretty useful, right? But also pretty big. Interestingly, in the last 5 years, they've advanced this to the following. So you can now do MEG and have a cup of coffee. She's loving this coffee, apparently. But overall, how does it work? So this is MEG OPM, optically pumped magnetoencephalography. So it fires lasers that magnetize atoms, that modulate light, and then you detect the light. If you missed all of that, that's okay. Just understand overall in these slides that I'm sharing with you that there's a bunch of different techniques for brain imaging, and they keep improving, improving, improving. So this is a lot smaller and lighter, but it's still actually being able to do the magnetoencephalography. Getting to stuff that's much more tractable, there's EEG, which is electroencephalography. So here it's tracking the electrical signals on the surface of your scalp. And this has been around since the 70s, if not before. You know, maybe some of you have read books by Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist. Well, you know, he had been a paraplegic for decades. How did he write these books? Well, he actually had EEGs. Intel actually built a special EEG for him to type his books by thinking, right? And so it's, yeah, electrical signals on the scalp. Here's a more modern version of that. And there's dozens of EEG companies out there and stuff. Then there's also EMG. So basically, instead of the signals on your scalp, they of course travel down on your skin and stuff too and show up in different places. And if it's not on your scalp, if it's elsewhere in your body, that's called EMG, which is electromyography, MYO for, you know, not on scalp. And so it's measuring these signals from the brain, but elsewhere. And here's some examples of a few electrodes just measuring the signals. And this is widely used in a ton of places already. And by the way, I'm lumping all of this in within BCI because rather than just thinking of the brain, it's really neurotech imaging, if you will, right? And it's, at the end of the day, it's sort of like, what sort of output can you get from the body without moving your hands or with mildly moving your hands? There's subvocalization, so you can actually speak by just barely moving your lips, like whispering, but in such a light whisper, you can't even hear it. And that's called subvocalization. And it's basically measuring silent speech. And there's prototypes out of MIT and stuff. There's a startup out of London that's doing this. So this is actually quite good. You can actually get near it's like a microphone without speaking, right? So I see a lot of promise here. You know, militaries are looking into this and so on too. There's also eye tracking, right? We don't normally think of eye tracking as a window into the brain and what's going on, but it turns out you can actually get a lot from that, as Warren had mentioned earlier. So to quote a paper that reviewed this, a rapidly emerging area of research is the use of the eye as a window to changes occurring in the brain. I mean, if we look at this high-res photo of an iris, you can see there's a lot going on there, and you can actually measure like health of a person overall, but also changes in pupil dilation, et cetera, right? Keeping going. There's something called functional ultrasound. So we probably, most of us know ultrasound from, you know, looking at 3D images of a baby in a mother's womb, but we can also point it at the brain and actually use that to see what's going on too. So ultrasound is sound that is at a frequency that human ear can't hear, but it's at a frequency that can, you know, go through the skull, have echoes from what's going on in the brain and detect that, right? Just sort of like looking at the mother's womb, but in the skull. And this, people have only been doing this more recently, but they're realizing, hey, this is pretty useful, right? You can get pretty good real-time info here. And then there's FNIRS. I'm particularly excited about this. FNIRS means functional near-infrared spectropscopy. And so basically it takes infrared light, it shoots it into the brain, and then it detects the changes in light absorption. So it's sort of like the ultrasound, but it's shooting light instead. And instead of getting the echoes back, it's just seeing how easily is this light getting absorbed. And this is all these techniques that I just covered, they're non-invasive, yet you can get real-time information, right? So the point I want to get across is there's a lot of techniques, they keep getting more and more advanced and so on, and consumer-friendly looking as well that you can use them. This, for example, is a helmet from Colonel, from Brian Johnson. He made $1 billion by a PayPal competitor 15 years ago. And one of the things he did with that was create this to measure himself as he's doing his don't die stuff. So now I'm going to move on to consumer devices. What's out there right now on the market that is very adjacent to this BCI. And then what I'm going to be doing is combining this together to point to some killer apps, because ultimately we need to accelerate BCI to be competitive with ASI, right? That's where we're headed. So related consumer devices to leading us towards superintelligence. So out there right now, we actually have, there's probably 10 or 20 startups that are using video images to detect human emotion from pictures and video, right? So, you know, this person here, maybe there's a 4% chance of fear, 70% chance of neutral, et cetera, right? So this is a very useful thing in a lot of contexts, of course. From the perspective here, I think it's just useful for, you know, self-regulation and independence and so on. But of course, advertisers love this sort of stuff and so on and so forth. But it's a thing that's already out there in a big way because people can make money from it. In terms of EEG, there's companies that have headphones that are regular headphones, but they also measure the electrical signals in your scalp. And then they track your level of focus. That's something that EEG is quite good at. And basically, it gives you a little ping if you ever get out of focus. So you want to get into flow, you want to get into focus. And this basically helps nudge you to staying in flow. So I think it's quite a nice use of EEG. EEG itself doesn't have great fidelity. It's really hard to get much out of it, but this is actually one pretty good use case. You can use EEG and some other things for typing as well. So this is an example this is the first time I saw research that was at par with someone good at typing. They were about 50 words per minute. This is out of Tsinghua University, which is one of China's top universities, 2012. And they're typing, and over the years, there's been better and better techniques to type with non-invasive VCI. Like I mentioned, Stephen Hawking used this to type most of his books. And there's other ways to type too, like I'll get to as well. Keeping going. You know, with glasses, it's pretty easy to display subtitles on them. You know, this is with LED technology, which goes back to the 70s. You probably had seen alarm clocks that are transparent that you can see through. That's all the same sort of technology. So it's sort of like you can stick this on with $10 worth of technology. And of course, there's fancier ways now too, with the more modern AR glasses like Brilliant, et cetera, but there's simple ways too. We now have glasses that have built-in cameras and microphones, such as the Meta Ray-Ban smart glasses. And these came onto market about 6 or 8 months ago. And I have a pair and I use them all the time. I love them, listen to podcasts, take calls, all that. They're shockingly good. And this is probably the first near AR device that really took off with consumers. A lot of these other ones haven't blown up yet, right? For example, this one, it's pretty cool, but it hasn't blown up yet. But this particular one, you know, Zuckerberg and Meta, for whatever horrible stuff they've done with privacy and data, and we all know that too well, they're actually killing it when it comes to augmented reality and the future of the smartphone and glasses. So this is a successful product that they've shipped. And this is called this V1. We're going to see V2, V3, V4, and I'll get more into that. They're also doing, of course, the full VR stuff that has morphed into augmented reality, a mixture of virtual reality and the real world. And Meta Quest 3 is a really great version of that. For $300, you can actually have augmented reality, and it's quite good. It's actually the first augmented reality that I used that didn't suck, right? So Meta's doing a great job in this. You can also pick up the Apple Vision Pro for about 10x the cost, and it's excellent, right? Super high resolution and all this, but the cost is too high. They also have eye tracking, really high quality eye tracking to help with basically controlling what you're doing, et cetera. Meta has had some of that in their previous products too, but not at the level here. So if you want a best-in-class augmented reality experience, it's hard to beat the Apple Vision Pro, which is out there right now. Hilariously, I just saw this a couple weeks ago. Dude turns his eye socket into a flashlight. So he lost his eye to cancer, I don't know, a few years ago. So he basically has a new artificial eyeball, but he put in a light there, and he uses it as a flashlight. It's got 20 hours of light. He uses it to walk around in the dark. He says it's excellent for nighttime reading. But I like this because it's an early example of a cyborg in a way that's slightly creepy, slightly weird, a bit Terminator-y, but at the same time, it's pretty awesome, right? So good for him. And I think this is a really great example of helping to shift the Overton window, about helping people to understand if we augment ourselves in certain ways that might have felt extra creepy 20 years ago, it's not so bad now, right? Speaking of Overton window, 10 years ago, the closest thing to this was Google Glass, right? And people freaked out, and Google shut down that project. This came out, 6 or 8 months ago, barely a whisper of worries. So people aren't as concerned about their privacy now as they were 10 years ago. And those of us in Web3 and blockchain doing privacy, we had hoped people would care. Mostly people don't, right? So there are still pockets that they really care. But generally, it is what it is. People care less about privacy. But there are benefits to that as well. You can start to ship things like this, which take us towards human superintelligence. So yeah, dude turns his eye into a light socket. Okay, So I've talked in this path of humans towards human superintelligence. I've talked about a lot of approaches to brain-computer interfaces. I've talked about products out there in the market. Now let's merge these together and start to imagine killer apps, right? We need something that will get out there in the market and push the market and grow it and push it and grow it, right? And we really actually have two paths here. One is to go deep tech, Neuralink style, to fix broken humans, and it's wonderful. The thing is, they're being held up by the regulators, right? Elon has even publicly complained about this online, so they'll probably lose 5 years, 7 years because they can't advance it, right? So the other path is to start with the non-invasive and then advance it with consumers, shift the Overton window, and then leverage that shift of Overton window to help take us to invasive. And I'll drill into all of this. So basically, how do we get to killer apps and consumer BCI? Necessarily, for now, this means non-invasive BCI. So one of them is in the Meta Orion, which they just released videos of their prototype about 2 weeks ago. They've been working on it 5 years. They basically intend to eat the phone, right? And I think this is the next generation of iPhones, et cetera, these glasses, right? And many sci-fi novels imagine this, Rainbow's End, Accelerando, all this. And they intend to eat the phone via the glasses, but critically, myoelectric BCI. So if you use Apple Vision Pro, you have to move your hands around and all this, and it gets quite exhausting. But the myoelectric BCI, sensing the electrical signals here, you can actually type as fast as you can type normally, and it's sensing the signals. So you're actually not compromising anything there. You can also move around a mouse, et cetera. So this wristband that this guy has here, that's the new mouse, in my view. And it's as revolutionary as the multi-touch and unleashing the iPhone, in my view. So I'm actually quite bullish on Meta when they release Orion in 6 months or 12 months. They probably have to name it something else because OpenAI also has Project Orion for the next thing. So let's see where these trademarks take us. But overall, these glasses, overall, I think is really where we're headed. And it's not just Meta. Apple is going for this hot and heavy too. They're going to be doing their own glasses style device. And they have to aim for something at the right cost and form factor, of course. So which will take us to things like SMing, silent messaging, which is sending text or voice by simply thinking about it, right? 10 minutes? Great. Okay. So Twitch typing is the best way, but there's also subvocal and more. Internal dialogue, like Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio. You can chat with an LLM to do Q&A, right, to get advice, and also search. High fidelity emotion detection, leveraging the not just images, but BCI. Perfect memory. So you're walking around, you're taking video of everything, like the glasses have, but then it's recording that. And then how do you retrieve it? Well, you use the FNIRS to think of something, and FNIRS picks up your visual cortex, which basically gives you sort of like a low-res TV image, low-res black and white TV image. That becomes the query into the LLM. And then, we have these image generators like DALL-E. You take the query, put it into the LLM, and then it spits out a high-fidelity image. And so it can do a query into the database of all the video that you've seen. Or a query into YouTube and all the video of humanity if you want, right? Seeing movies, all of that, right? So, and there's actually been research on this going back to Carnegie Mellon in 2012 or so and elsewhere. So perfect memory, I see this as a killer app. Sharing visual memories. Once you retrieve that perfect memory, you can send it to friends very easily, right? And this is much faster than describing an experience. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Another one, super fast content creation, right? A lot of people build their careers as video game designers, as filmographers, et cetera. So imagine if you think of an image, FNIRS detects, and then you use that as a query to the LLM, it generates an image, a hi-fi image, and repeat, right? And repeat is critical. So the first image you don't like, but then you think of a new one that slightly tweaks something, and it refines, right? So I see this as having great potential. Yeah, super fast content creation. We can go the Cyberpunk 2077 route, where we can have prosthetics that are not just as good as us, but make us much more powerful, running way faster, throwing balls much faster, augmenting our arms, and so on. And having this really high bandwidth brain-computer interface will really make a big difference here. Then, going further, there's this idea of mind meld from Star Trek and otherwise, which is conversation and pictures. This can take us there without invasive, right? FNIRS. So I think of an image, FNIRS detects it, you put it into the LLM, and then you spit out the hi-fi image, and you send that hi-fi image right away to your friend. And then they send one back. So back and forth. Every 10 seconds, you have images back and forth. that is much higher bandwidth than before, right? Because a picture is worth 1,000 words. So we have way higher bandwidth. And this is not science fiction. This is not a scientific mystery. We can actually build this technology today, right? This is brain-brain communication. So mind meld is possible with today's technology. It just hasn't hit the consumer, and it's barely being explored even in the scientific world because maybe it's too easy, I don't know, but it's there. We can go one step further. So our brains are super plastic, right? So what if we do a mind meld, say V2? I think of an image, but I don't pass it through the LLM. I just send it directly as that lo-fi image to my friend. And if I know them well, maybe it's my wife or someone else, then her brain has learned my way of thinking well over time. So she sees my raw image, understands it, and then sends it back to me. So we're talking back and forth with these raw images. And the bandwidth is, let's say it's even a 100 by 100 image. That's 10,000 bits. Let's say 100 by 100 with, say, 3 bits. So I guess that's 30,000 bits. 30,000 bits every, say, 3 seconds, right? Back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. That's way higher bandwidth than talking, right? That's the highest bandwidth we have right now is talking face-to-face. So mind meld, I think, is also going to be a killer app. So overall, I talked about a lot of killer apps. I don't know which one will take off. Maybe there'll be another one yet. But I'm quite hopeful for this, of course, because of all the possibilities. Now, where will this take us, right? What does this look like as a happy path towards human superintelligence? So basically, right now, what we have is we have our brains. We've got this biostack, but then we have this silicon stack co-brain. The starting point would be something like the Meta Orion glasses or the one from Apple or otherwise. So there's you and this technology, and they're co-processed for each other, right? And you might think this one is controlling this. Maybe at first, but over time it will change. Why? Because we were all natural-born cyborgs, to paraphrase a famous neuroscientist. So when you ride a bike, it becomes part of you, right? When you type in a computer, as soon as you sit down and start typing, it becomes part of you. When you use a BCI, it becomes part of you. Your brain attaches itself to you. This is critical. So over time, these first devices will come out. They won't be that great, sort of like the iPhone 1. But then we'll go from the version 1 to the version 2 and so on. Just like we saw with cell phones, just like we saw with smartphones, et cetera. They're going to get better and better and better and better. What does that mean from a bandwidth perspective? Well, at first, the silicon stack, for it to be aligned, it needs to be much weaker than the biostack side, right? So that's what it will look like at first. 5 minutes, great. Then the power will go up, right? We'll keep aligning ourselves over time, increase the bandwidth, still using FNIRs and other technologies, non-invasive, but the market will be driving this. And eventually it'll get par with our bio side of brain, and that's very nice. What then? So overall, why do we want the silicon stack co-brain? Well, it actually offers way more storage, way more compute compared to the biostack, potentially, right? As long as it stays aligned. But for that, we need bandwidth, right? We need to have enough bandwidth such that it stays aligned. Otherwise, it will feel like the separate entity, right? And that's really a good definition of what an individual is I have way higher bandwidth talking to myself than I do to any of you, sort of at least a 10x difference, right? And that's kind of the difference. So we really need the bandwidth such that it stays part of you. How do we get there? Well, we could go with implants, right? Of course, this is invasive. Although, there's maybe ways around that. Like rather than having to crack open your skull every 6 months, which is what you do now, imagine Elon just talked about this, replacing your bone-based skull with a technology-based skull, silicon and steel and more, right? And then you just flip open crack it open and it's easy. So we'll see. It feels weird right now, but just watch. This Overton window is going to shift. But fortunately, we have better ways. Much easier than cracking open your skull is the needle, right? Optogenetics. So that's a lot more palatable. And maybe if you can't get it in the USA, go to Honduras, right? It's wide open for the laws there. That's why they have a lot of medical tourism. Actually, here too, in Thailand, the laws are a little more loose, so we have a lot of medical tourism here in Thailand as well. So overall, the demand is going to push us to go past the non-invasive, right? One reason might be to fix AI risk, right? Western governments might realize, oh shit, or because of the risk, or hungry smaller nations, the Thailands of the world, might do it first, right? And we're starting to see this sort of regulatory arbitrage game. Estonia did e-residency, and others are following suit as a way to get ahead, right? So Argentina is doing this as we speak. Secondly, market forces, right? Consumers are going to want more performance. They're going to want more bandwidth. So those two things will drive it. Where will this take us? So it's going to unlock the invasive or semi-invasive. We're going to keep evolving. We're going to get to 100x bandwidth, 100x storage. So, so we can break this bottleneck, and then we keep going. Now silicon stack power is greater than biostack power, yet it's still all you, okay? And then it's going to be way greater. 1x goes to 5x, then 10x, then 100x, then 1000x. And it's all still you. We are natural-born cyborgs, just like we're at one with keyboards, etc. Or you can view it as hyper-localized AI alignment. And it's aligning with ourselves. We each get our own personal AI. That's the way to think about it too. But it really is you, because we are natural-born cyborgs. Guess what? Once you've got the 1000x level, you have achieved human superintelligence. You're now competitive with artificial superintelligence, and you get a medal. So to wrap this up, now I've talked about how we can solve this issue by leveraging market forces, non-invasive BCI with consumers, to shift the Overton window to take us to invasive BCI and human superintelligence. But now imagine you're 90 years old, okay? You've got this coprocessor that's part of you that's 1000x more powerful than you. So your biostack brain is only like 0.1% of your power, right? But you're on your deathbed, your body is dying, you're laying there, you've got cancer, whatever, you're 90 years old. You've got hours to live. Yet at the same time, only 0.1% of your consciousness is on the bio side. Most of your consciousness, including most of the control, has evolved and grown independently in the silicon side. So you have a choice. Some people will opt to just end their life and have everything end. But I know myself personally, I'm going to just cut that cord. I will clip it like a fingernail. That's it. It's 0.1% of me. Who cares if a tiny bit of my fingernail is gone? So clip it like a fingernail. And then I am fully digital. I, Trent, am living in the cloud, right? It's a ship of Theseus style. A better example is, imagine you start by having a shack, and then you build a bigger house around it, and bigger, and eventually you have a mansion. And then you build a whole skyscraper around this thing. At some point, you don't need that shack anymore. You've got everything else. So you just tear down the shack, right? So this is basically how we can take our existing brains and nervous system and bodies too, don't have to restrict your brain, and evolve and enter into this digital universe without relying on uploads. I would love to do uploads, but the technology isn't there. This is a more a market-based path. And so that's what I presented today. I'm going to conclude. So make no mistake, AI superintelligence is coming. But we can bring BCI to the masses via killer apps like silent messaging, perfect memory, and more. And market forces and AI risk will drive us to a competitive substrate. And in the end, we will get human superintelligence to explore the cosmos and reshape it. Thank you. Time for questions, or?
Hey Trent, thanks a lot for the presentation, really insightful. So one question that I had during the presentation is that current LLMs and current AIs, they're basically fed with all the knowledge that humans generated and then packed them into a nice chat interface. And you were talking a lot about like superintelligence, and I was just wondering what would be the source of superintelligence, because like, are we going to create more intelligence with LLMs, or humans are going to generate more knowledge? So yeah, I guess that's my question.
I think that's a great question, and it's a recurring one. So there's this whole field of AI, right? And one tiny subfield of that, which is actually blowing up to the masses, is LLMs that are trained on web data and a bit more, right? But of course, there's all these other fields. For example, I was working on creative AI for chip design in the early 2000s, and it was able to invent new circuits. And friends of mine were doing similar stuff and getting patents on this quietly. They would apply as themselves, not as the AI, of course. And they would get patents as a way to sort of say, hey, it's novel. So that's examples where it wasn't given the data of what that final form was, and instead it was using AI, in this case, evolutionary computation, evolving towards that final thing. So that's one path to as an example of AI that can go beyond what it was given. Another big one that's actually being used extensively is synthetic data generation, right? So you build a simulator, and then within that simulator of, say, cars for self-driving data, you maybe start with a scenario where someone going around a corner based on real world, but then you tweak it in 1,000 different ways or 1,000,000 different ways, and you may have all 1,000 different of those samples as training to your LLM, right? So simulators to generate synthetic data will give us 1,000x, 1,000,000x more data. And finally, one other way for getting data is we've trained on data from the web, but video is huge, right? So I think about like even my own personal photo and video archives. I have tons of data there, right? And so what's happening now among the big AI companies is they're going out and basically sucking up a bunch of video, and this is where we're getting things like Sora and stuff from, by looking at video data. So we have no shortage of data, and we have great ability to generate a lot more. It's not constrained by that at all.
I'll start here. By the way, Trent also has a very interesting talk about world models, and we haven't even started with data from nature, so there's a ton left to explore.
Quick question. It may be an issue of semantics. We use the word intelligence. I'm not sure I know what you imply by the word intelligence, and of course we can go ping pong with the word consciousness. What is intelligence from your view?
Yeah, overall, other talks I've given, if you ask a room of 10 AI researchers what a definition of intelligence is, you'll get 30 responses, right? And I've given talks that go through about 20 of the definitions, right? So I think we can all agree that it's impossible to arrive at a single definition, just like it's really, really hard to agree on a definition for blockchain or other things. So intelligence, at the core, probably the best way to describe, I would say, is a machine that, or the expression of a machine that could reduce entropy. That's probably the most general thing. Some people might say you need agency as well. So if you want, sure, put it in within an agent, a feedback control system. But overall, that's probably the best. You can, say compression. You can say a lot of other things too. But that's how I think about it in the most general sense. In terms of consciousness, that is such a red herring. I honestly prefer to avoid even discussions. And I've thought a lot about this, right? I think I'm one credit short of a philosophy degree, mostly focused on consciousness and things like that. So, and I agree that, we perceive consciousness as humans, but it might be an emergent effect. And this approach that I described aims to not try to solve the problem of consciousness, because rather it goes this sort of ship of Theseus approach, or this shack turning into a skyscraper approach, where it sort of gets the substrate for whatever it is going on in our brains and bodies expands into this digital medium as well, right? So, but we don't know for sure, right? It might be, there's a negative case that says, what, none of this is able to expand, and we'll never be able to clip that fingernail in the end, right? That's a possibility, but I'm hopeful, and I think we should try.
I have a question. I'm Zev. So you spoke about how governments are pushing this. There's a natural material dialectic where this is just good for every individual, every society, every government, all sorts of organizational levels of people. So this is happening, right? This is sort of self-unfolding. At the individual level, anybody here might want to use some of these things, but also there's a lot of people asking why? Like why this one, why that one? There's an array of devices, yada, yada. But my question is, have you thought about at the social level, specifically tribal, value level, if people were to come together and say, how do we use all this stuff in a good way or our way? Yeah. What would that look like?
Yeah, so actually yesterday at the Foresight workshop, there was a group of us talking about this, and there's sci-fi novels that envision this too, the way that I'm thinking about it. There's going to be a spectrum. There's going to be some people that don't augment themselves at all, and that's completely fine. There's going to be the full-on artificial superintelligences that have digital birth, if you will. And there's also going to be the humans that have got to a level of artificial superintelligence, went full digital. And there's going to be augmented humans in various shapes and forms. There's going to be humans that only augment themselves biologically, grow wings or whatever, such as they did in Hyperion, or go full cyborg like Cyberpunk 2077. Or so there's going to be this whole spectrum, and then people will self-form into different societies and stuff, right? Nexus, the novel, explores this too. Overall. just like we see there's, with smartphone technology, people, it's another tool to help us form it into tribes with blockchain technology. I think it's going to be like this too, but on a much more profound level, because it's affecting our very bodies, ourselves, right? So the choices are going to be much more strong and individual. And of course, there's going to be protests, there's going to be the people who are super anti-augmenting, who aren't going to be tolerant of the people who are augmenting. And that's fine, right? That's a fact of life. So I see overall, there will be a self-organization into the different tribes. There's a really great essay by, I forget his name, but it's about 2013, where he talks about the world builders and the lotus eaters and more, and basically sort of different tribes. The world eaters are the ones using the technology to get more powerful, stronger, make more money. There's the lotus eaters that use it in a very hedonistic way, and so on. So we don't exactly know how well it will evolve. There's probably going to be very mundane things, and there's going to be super weird, cool stuff too, just like we saw recently with this AI making $1 million, right? That's what I see. But the world is going to be a lot weirder than any of us expect in the next 20 years, and hopefully it's going to be fun.
Thank you, Trent. And thanks for all the questions. We'll have Ruben next. And if you have any more ideas, please stick around for the ideation workshop. So we'd love to hear those.